Welcome back to the MOOC course titled Qualitative Research Methods. My name is Aradhana Malik and I am helping you with this course. And in the previous class, we discussed material culture as a method of collecting and analyzing qualitative material. In this class, we are going to talk about autoethnography, personal narrative and reflexivity. Now, we have discussed autoethnography in a previous class. So, we will touch upon this briefly. We will also talk about another type of ethnography called applied ethnography, and we will discuss that in greater detail in this class. Now, this too is from a paper, it's all of this, most of this class is from the strategies of, most of this lecture is, most of this course is from the Handbook of Qualitative Research Methods. I have taken most of the material from the Handbook of Qualitative Research Methods, and this is from a paper by Ellis and Bochner by the same name. So, that is what we will talk about today. Okay. What is autoethnography? We discussed this, but let's just for revision's sake, autoethnography is a study of one's own culture. Auto means self, ethnos means culture, and graphy means research process. The goal of an ethnographer is to enter and document the moment by moment concrete details of a life and use his or her life experience to generalize to a larger group or culture. So, the ethnographer goes into the situation, experiences the situation moment by moment and documents the details of that situation and uses his or her life experiences as a participant in the situation to generalize to a larger group or culture, and says that any participant in this situation would experience similarly. So, the generalization occurs. So, the autoethnographer goes in and considers oneself as a representative, writes or interprets the situation as a participant in that particular situation. Autoethnography is an autobiographical genre of writing and research that displays multiple layers of consciousness, connecting the personal to the cultural. And then we move on to reflexivity, which is an integral part of autoethnography. Back and forth ethnographers gaze, first through an ethnographic wide angle lens, focusing on social and cultural aspects of their personal experience, and then they look inward, exposing a vulnerable self that is moved by and may move through, refract and resist cultural interpretation. So, once the autoethnographer becomes a part of the situation, then the autoethnographer goes back and forth between experiencing the situation and interpreting the same situation from the perspective of a researcher. So, we go back and forth. As an insider, we experience what we are experiencing, and then we come out and say, well, this is what I experienced. How does it make sense to me as a researcher? And this is called reflexivity, trying to understand our experiences in light of what we know as researchers. And that is an integral part of autoethnography. We have discussed this is just for revision's sake. So, this is reflexivity. Okay. Personal narratives are personal stories. Personal narratives are personal accounts. In order to complete member research, where the emphasis is on the research process and the group being studied, social scientists recently have begun to view themselves as the phenomenon and to write evocative personal narratives specifically focused on their academic as well as their personal lives. The meaning constructed in these reports stems from the researcher's own experience as a part of the setting they attempt to study. Personal narrative is an outcome of autoethnography. Reflexivity facilitates autoethnography that results in a personal narrative. As a participant of this situation, this is what I experienced. So, this is a personal narrative. In my capacity as a participant in this situation, I experienced this, and as a researcher I will explain or interpret what I experienced in light of what I know as a researcher. Okay. So, that is what this whole strategy or method is about. Okay. Criticisms about this, or criticism of of this, are: to what kind of truth do these stories aspire? What are we trying to get at? What is the aim? What is the benefit? We were talking about fruitfulness in the previous class. What are we getting out of these personal narratives? To this, the author's response is that the story does not aspire to reflect the researcher's past accurately. The aim of the story is not to tell people what happened to the researcher. It's not about, oh, I went through this and I went through that. No. Rather, it looks towards the consequences it produces, the kind of person it shapes the researcher into, and the new possibilities it introduces for the researcher for living his or her life. So, it helps inform the reader, or it helps add to the knowledge base by trying to understand how the experiences that the researcher went through and explained and interpreted in his or her from his or her perspective as a researcher and as a participant, are contributing to or are likely to shape how the researcher is behaving today, or how the researcher is likely to experience life and behave in future. What has this learning contributed towards the future of the researcher as an individual participant, and towards the future of the other participants in that situation? What kinds of possibilities has this study opened up? How have these experiences shaped the life of the researcher, the present and possibly the future life? And by life we mean the reactions of the researcher to the environment that the researcher may find himself or herself in. Our life is shaped by what we experience, how we interpret what we experience, and what we do as a result of that experience in response to the fresh set of stimuli coming towards us. That is what life is, right? So, that is exactly what this process explains, that because the researcher went through this situation, they are going to be dealing with similar situations in a different manner. For example, rural tourism. A very good example comes to mind. Rural tourism, new concept coming up. Many of our colleagues, friends, counterparts have not, or many people living in larger cities have never seen village life. So, they may have either a very depressed view of what life in a village looks like. You don't have continuous supply of electricity, you may not have continuous supply of water, you may not have potable drinking water, life is tough, life is this, life is that. Fair enough, they've never experienced it, and many times we only see things that are significant events. They may either be something very good or something very bad. We don't see normal life on television. We hear about things through the experiences of our friends. Some of them decide to go on a trip to a village through these rural tourism companies. People will take you go to a village, and then you experience life in a village as a resident in the village. They go to the village, they experience life, and they realize, well, it's not as bad as it felt or as it seemed to be. It is quite comfortable. Sleeping on a mud floor is not all that bad. One doesn't need to be scared of rodents or animals. Cows, for example, of course, snakes and big cats can be dangerous, but cattle are not all that dangerous. It's fun to play with goats and cows and all. So, I am just taking a very rudimentary example here. So after the person has gone through this experience and seen and felt these things, the perspective of this person towards village life changes, right? And then this person comes back and shares that experience with other people who may have wanted to go and work in a village or stay in a village or even settle down in a village, but may have experienced certain fears. So these experiences, then, you know, the person is very honest saying that before I went in I was scared of X, Y, Z, but after having been through these experiences I can say I'm still scared of these 20% things, but comfortable with these 60% things, and I'm absolutely, my opinion about these 20% things has completely changed. I'm actually more, you know, I prefer these 20% things over whatever I was doing here. So it's not necessary to have access to a cell phone or a laptop all the time. I can enjoy nature by just being in nature. Maybe that is the output. So if you want to go and work in a village, it's not going to be that tough. That can be the output. Okay, so how it shapes the person's future experiences, future life, future outlook, it will open the locks in our minds towards similar situations, and that is the author's response to it, that this is what autoethnography does. You go in and then you bring back this learning and you say, if I could do it, anyone else in my situation coming from my context could do it and could experience the same things. So let's all get rid of our barriers. Okay. Personal narrative reflects or advances a romantic construction of the self. That's another criticism, that it romanticizes the self. We only highlight the significant events and hence is unworthy of being a part of social science. So it just expresses something out of the ordinary, something very, very unique, and it does not capture everything, maybe. Okay. So that is one more criticism, and then that will be different for every single person, every single researcher, and that's one very big criticism of this approach. Now, how do you do autoethnography? Method and form. 3 stages of doing autoethnography are: the first stage is bringing out every painful and emotional detail and explaining the kinds of decisions made and the reasons for making those decisions. That's stage 1. Stage 2, so we dig into ourselves and we bring out whatever we have experienced. The second stage is networking with people who have had similar experiences. Okay, so we connect with people who have had similar experiences. 1, we are brutally honest about what we have experienced. 2, we find other people who have experienced similar things. 3, the third stage is writing the report in such a manner so as to honor the ethical code for research, that is, informing the people involved about the exact nature of the research, preserving their anonymity if required, and ensuring that their safety at all costs. This is absolutely essential. Qualitative research deals with a lot of personal information, a lot of information that can put the participants in a very vulnerable position. So it's absolutely critical that confidentiality be maintained wherever possible, and the information be shared in the public domain only and only if the participants understand specific identifying information, of course, be shared in the public domain only and only if and when the participants understand what is going to be shared and how it's going to be shared, and they agree to it, understanding all these things. Otherwise, this cannot happen. Okay, so their safety, their comfort needs to be protected at all costs. Okay. Defending and expanding autoethnography. The whole process of autoethnography may serve as a medium of catharsis, venting for people who attempt to study highly emotional or painful experiences that they have gone through. When they write the report, the focus shifts from their personal experiences to their experiences and responsibilities as researchers in terms of the different factors influencing the whole study, like bias, validity, eligibility criteria, operationalization, control variables, confounding factors, building models, replicability, and objectivity. So it's like giving the person a chance to vent, and reflexivity results in distancing oneself from the experience and studying it as an independent objective researcher. And even though biases cannot be removed totally, but acknowledging the biases and the confounding factors and explaining and interpreting results in such a manner that these factors are, the impact of these factors is minimized to the extent possible. Okay. Now we move on to the other concept that I told you about, and that is applied ethnography. What is applied ethnography? Applied research, applied work, and this is from a paper by Chambers in the same book. Applied work helps people make decisions and is generally directed towards informing others of the possible consequences of policy options or of programs of directed change. We've talked about participatory action research in a previous class. So applied ethnography is primarily, it's a method of collecting and analyzing data through being a participant and seeing the impact of what one does in that situation on how, or effecting change and then seeing the effects of, or studying change and then seeing the effects of what one has suggested. These consequences may be anticipated as in impact studies and forecasting, or they may be determined in retrospect as in evaluation research. So they may be forecasted, they may be, we can say, okay, as a result of this study, this is what we are likely to expect, and the forecasting happens, or they may be determined in retrospect as in evaluation research. So we did this as a result of a study on XYZ. We found that in retrospect, this is X caused Y. The most immediate measure of the significance of applied research is its contribution to decision making. Applied research is always connected to decision making, either in future or in retrospect evaluation of a previously or evaluation of a previous decision making exercise that is likely to influence future decisions along similar lines. That is what applied research does. Okay. Aims of applied ethnography. Few aims are: one, it's a study of the cultural processes that occur in efforts to respond to particular human problems. It's always connected to problems. There's a problem, solution. It's always connected to real life. For example, how social groups collide and mix in situations of change and in the cultural meanings that result from the interactions of interested groups or stakeholders. So it's always the aim of applied ethnography is to effect change in the situations that it studies. It is to understand the problems and to solve those problems, okay, or to critically evaluate the way decisions were taken and to see how those decisions can be improved in future. Okay. Approaches. The first approach here that we are going to talk about is practical anthropology. Now, in this approach, the ethnographer's ability to observe behaviors and to explain their significance in relation to their functions in a larger institutional and cultural context come to the fore. So, the ethnographer observes behaviors and explains why those behaviors are or were important and what did these behaviors result in as far as the larger institutional and cultural context was concerned. Critical understanding and explanation of covert elements of culture to explain the relationship between the self and the other. So this is this reflects an understanding of the connection between the self and the other as participants in the context. What is my presence doing to this context? How is it influencing decision making? How are the elements of culture interacting with each other? Where do I fit in as a participant? Where do other participants fit into this situation? What are the problems? What are the solutions? So it's it leads to a critical understanding of and explanation of the elements of culture that are visible, that are evident to all. Action anthropology and participant interference refer to learn while helping. So we help the community and we learn about the community in the process of helping the community, and that is called action anthropology and participant interference. Okay. Varieties of applied ethnography. The first approach here is cognitive approach, and I am sorry for the very tiny text, but I thought it would help if all of this were put on the same slide. Cognitive approaches tend to focus on failures of communication or cultural breakdowns. They tend to be built on those communicative breakdowns that are directly experienced by the researcher and that are to be resolved by the researcher's attempts to understand what made the breakdowns occur. We are talking about decision making, we are talking about understanding how behaviors occur. So, in this specific approach, we try and find out why the problems surfaced in the first place, and we are talking about specifically communication problems or cultural breakdowns. Why did some decision not work, or why is some decision likely to fail? There is also an assumption, seldom made entirely clear, that the ethnographer is better positioned to unravel communicative disorders between groups than are members of the groups themselves, because they initially understand much less of the situation and are therefore more likely to experience first hand the kinds of blunders and breakdowns that yield rich data and point towards communicative resolutions. The ethnographer is an outsider, so there are no biases, there are no preconceived notions, there is no history, there are no antecedent conditions. So the ethnographer goes in with a blank mind and sees things first hand. They don't know what has led to that particular situation, they don't know what has caused it, they just see things happening and they say something went wrong here, something went wrong here, something went wrong here. They don't know about the whys yet. They figure out the whys, W-H-Y, the whys of the situation on their own based on their understanding of similar situations in helping the community. So, the understanding provides, this bias free, antecedent free perception or understanding of the situation offers a very different, unique perspective that participants ridden with their biases and preconceived notions and earlier ideas about why things were going wrong are not able to see. And that is very helpful to some situations that have simmered for days and months and possibly years also, and where things have been breaking down. An outsider comes and sees things from a fresh perspective and says, some things become immediately evident to a person who is not being too emotional about the situation, and that helps. Emotions confound things, preconceived notions, antecedent conditions, why this happened. We have all the background knowledge, and that background knowledge many times interferes with the perceptions, the interpretation of people who are in that situation. So, an outsider is able to see things much more clearly. Okay. And that is the assumption, of course, but it is not made clear. Stakeholders who are more closely associated with the problem at hand are likely to have already developed cognitive defenses that insulate them from direct experience of the kinds of breakdowns that yield significant data or understanding. This is what I am saying. People who have a stake in the situation, who are going to be directly affected by the situation, have already insulated themselves. They have already built walls around themselves that, of course, save them from further damage because they are in a vulnerable position, but that also prevent critical information from coming in. So, we say I am not going to talk to so and so person because I am not comfortable with them. Why? Because so and so and I had a fight some time back. Now, the person we need to talk to find out or to interact with to resolve the situation may be giving us some critical information that we are not receptive to. The situation that we find dangerous as insiders may actually have a solution in it that we are not able to see as insiders, because the mere connection with that situation is likely to result in some harm to us. On the other hand, an outsider who comes has very little, if at all, to lose. So, the person comes in, sees both the situations, is not really in a vulnerable position, and so does not have defenses in front of him or her, and so is able to see things much more clearly and present solutions that stakeholders might be insulated to. Okay, all right. Then approaches of macro and micro analysis to resituate the local within the larger context of regional, national and even global events. Autoethnography is about these relationships rather than about the experiences of particular groups or populations. It's not about one experience of one group, one population, one person, no. It's about situating the behaviors in a context with the explicit aim of understanding why the context is the way it is and how the context is functioning and how it is likely to evolve in future. Various reasons, how can problems be solved, etc. But it is an attempt to resituate it. Ethnography started out with an idea of understanding the context. The focus is no longer that, especially in applied ethnography. The focus changes. So ethnographers situate themselves within a context to understand how the larger scheme of things works, okay, and how their individual experiences relate to the experiences of the community at large. The tendency for applied ethnography to expand its methodological reach not only with the use of increasingly sophisticated qualitative methods, but also by adopting or at least responding to more quantitative research methods. So applied ethnography is no longer focusing exclusively on qualitative methods. Qualitative methods are being supplemented with quantitative methods. Whatever is being found out from qualitative methods is being supplemented with or being verified by the addition of quantitative methods, so that the interpretation that is generated becomes more believable. Okay. Integration of qualitative aspects of research with larger research activities. The first one here is beginning of research activity, defining of research parameters. Whenever research requires accurate portrayals of stakeholder values or opinions, qualitative ethnographic data have proven. So qualitative ethnography, qualitative research provides a beginning of the research activity. It helps define research parameters. Then whenever research requires accurate portrayals of stakeholder values or opinions, qualitative ethnographic data have often proven superior to survey data, particularly in cases that involve long-term field exposure and in situations where informants might feel at risk or have other reasons to provide incorrect responses, or where their truer responses might develop over time. Collection of qualitative data takes place over a period of time. It requires a much greater rapport between the researcher and the participants. So wherever there is a chance that the participants may not reveal their true selves, the rapport building is essential. That is where qualitative applied ethnography really helps, because the researcher goes in, establishes a rapport with the people, says, "I'm here to help you," and things start happening. Ethnographic data helps direct quantitative validation of the phenomena being studied and provides a contextual reference to explain results obtained through quantitative methods. Two varieties of applied ethnography are: one is the action approach. We have already talked about participatory action research in a previous class, so I am not going to dwell too much on that, but very briefly, action oriented research is described within the context of a collaborative model in which researchers and community activists form policy research clusters that are focused on important community problems. In these settings, ethnography is shaped in part by the constraints of field situations, including the social and political realities of the dissemination utilization context, as well as by considerations that the research does not violate cultural principles within the community. A major goal of action research is to encourage participants to test their own theories in use as they relate to particular social problems. So researchers get to see what they have learnt and how it is useful in the local context. Okay, clinical approach seeks to train people to use ethnographic strategies to gain a better understanding of their own cultural situations, or to understand more fully those cultural processes that influence others with whom they are involved. And clinical approaches specifically directed towards helping the populations, towards solving problems and towards training people, first being part of that situation, then training people to solve their own problems. Those activities in which professionals of various kinds are encouraged to think about their practice in ethnographic terms. It's a form of ethnographic teaching in which the professionals are encouraged to use an ethnographic perspective and at least some methods of ethnographic inquiry to first conduct self-ethnography and later to apply principles of ethnography to understanding cultural diversity within the clinical setting. So, it is specifically aimed at training and making the populations self-reliant in terms of first understanding their problems, explaining them, and then training the community to solve its own problems. Okay, some issues in applied ethnography are, some criticisms are reliability and validity. We've discussed this ad nauseum, so I'm not going to go into this. Difficulties with retrieving meaningful information from the complex, rich and deep data that is collected over a significant amount of time, and that is one big criticism. What do we do with these mountains of data? The time taken to analyze data and relevance of these results in light of the dynamic nature and speed of environmental evolution, and the tendency to be biased in collection, analysis and interpretation of data as participants in the situation. So, we may be biased, we may not be able to, and that is one big criticism here, we may not be able to explain the data objectively. Some defenses are the long-term and relatively intimate acquaintance with research subjects are that is characteristic of much ethnography, provides rich contextual information. So, the richness of the information is one big benefit. Then successful application of research, successful application to research situations in which subjects are not likely to be candid. We discussed this a minute ago. And simply helping people is the other benefit of ethnography in applied work. We go in, we help the community and we learn something in the process. Some methods of applied ethnography are focus group interviews. The second is stepwise research, in which long-term field presence is replaced by brief ethnographic visits to solve particular research problems posed by an ongoing research project. And the third is participatory research strategies that involve those at the research site in data collection efforts. Now, how do we know that the research is going to be useful? First is the accessibility of research findings. Are they available? The knowledge needs to be available in an appropriate manner to those who have a stake in the program of change. People need to be able to use the findings. The second is applied ethnography should also be relevant to the goals and prescribed activities of stakeholders and clients. People who are actually in the situation should be able to use the results. Then it should be relevant, it should really solve the problems that it seeks to solve, and it should, people in that situation should see it as useful. Applied ethnography also needs to be responsive to different claims upon the significance of a course of action. Then applied ethnography should meet a criterion of credibility in terms of being responsive to those standards of evidence and proof that are favored by clients and stakeholders. So, clients and stakeholders become the judges of whether this is useful or not, whether the research is useful or not, and they need to generate proofs, or applied ethnography needs to generate proof that is acceptable to the clients and stakeholders. And lastly, applied research needs to address matters of prospect and judgment, that is to understand that stakeholders and clients are often more interested in what could be or even in what should be than they are in whatever currently is, which means that the clients and stakeholders don't want an explanation of what is really happening, they already know it, but they would like to know what could happen if things could be changed, and that is the ultimate acid test of applied ethnography. Now, that is all we have time for in this lecture. We will continue with some more inputs on qualitative research in the next class. Thank you very much for listening.